Ramattra. This is a hero that we have pretty much kept an eye and a lookout for ever since release of basically Season 2. Just because he was in the beginning in a very weird spot where honestly a lot of people just expected much more and that wasn't delivered, right? We expected him to actually be overpowered or even at least a decent tank, but in reality he was underpowered, wasn't doing that much damage, and honestly wasn't providing that tempo that Blizzard advertised, right? So if you ask yourself what is tempo, pretty much being able to run down, have a lot of movement and mobility, and basically help your team dive, that's the tempo there. And in reality he didn't have that, right? So he didn't have the mobility, he didn't actually even have any damage, and he was very easy to kill in that sense. So today we're going to be going over ZBRA playing Ramattra here in top 500. So this is basically top 10 tanks in Overwatch 2 right now for sure, if not top tank in general. And this is going to be honestly an in-depth look into how Ramattra fares up in top 500, where you're playing against Roadhog, you're playing against Orisa, you're playing against some of the best tanks in the game, honestly even mechanically skilled players. So before we continue on, if you guys once again do enjoy this type of content and want to see more of this coverage, definitely consider subscribing and checking out my previous videos. Once again, 99% of you guys are not subscribed, so if you enjoy the content, make sure you guys drop a sub, and let's continue on with the video. Alright, so first I'm going to be covering pretty much every change that has happened to Ramattra, which have been nothing but buffs as we expected. And quite honestly, these are some of the best buffs or changes in general, if you even count nerfs, that I have seen ever since release of Overwatch 2. Because we've been thinking like, how can they actually buff Ramattra in a way where he's viable but not be broken? And to be quite honest, these are some of the best buffs I've seen. Because right now he seems very balanced in my opinion, although some might argue he's overpowered. Well, that's going to change as soon as people actually learn how to counter him, which I'll talk about later on in the video, right? So his Nemesis form movement speed increased by 20%, okay? That is by far the best change there. That's honestly where that tempo comes from, because now when you jump into Nemesis form, believe it or not, you can chase down a lot of people quicker than you think, as you see him running on the screen here, pretty much. And in general, you can actually outrun a lot of tanks for sure, because you definitely do have the extra move speed there. His armor bonus increased from 150 to 225, so he has more defense there, so he can definitely block for longer duration, which is an issue people have talked about. I'll also talk about that later on. And last but not least, his void barrier, which is basically his shield, kind of like Reinhardt for example. Cooldown reduced by 2 seconds. Those are some very good changes. Makes him a lot more viable and not broken, which is a big deal. So how are people playing Ramattra now versus how he was played at the beginning of the season? Was very different, for instance, right? So back then, before these buffs, Ramattra was basically, you're gonna stand in corners, you're gonna peek, you're gonna poke, you're gonna shield, and you're just gonna stall. You really can't do much more than stall, because you don't have that much movement. If you try to jump in and dive the enemy targets, you're just honestly gonna get pushed off, or you're just gonna get ran on. People are just gonna run away from you, and you couldn't do much because you have to fight up close, right? So with these changes, people are playing, and especially ZBRA here in top 500, he's playing him a lot different. He's actually getting in people's faces, he's chasing them down, he's punching them, and honestly he's playing boxing in Overwatch 2, which is just hilarious in my opinion, right? So that's the biggest change that I've noticed from the different playstyle that people are playing Ramattra. Another thing I wanted to mention is now with this increased movement speed, you're actually able to maintain your ult for a very long duration, a period of time. Right, so how does Ramattra's ult work? It's very simple, and honestly it's something we haven't seen before. So all you have to do is just make sure you maintain your distance with the enemy targets and your ult stays up. So how do you maintain your distance? Well, there you go, with Nemesis form and the increased movement speed by 20%. So when you have that increased movement speed, you're able to stay close, you're actually able to do the more damage, have more armor bonus, right, and have lower cooldown on your shield. You're able to actually provide that tempo that initially Blizzard advertised. So that's the biggest change there. Alright, next let's take a look at pretty much all the different plays ZBRA's making and what tanks work well against his playstyle and Ramattra in general, because I think his playstyle is kind of what you want to aim for, right? So Ramattra is still struggling a bit, I'll say a bit, not too much, against Doomfist. Just because Doomfist is able to punch Ramattra away and deny that gap. Right, so if your Ramattra is trying to jump on the enemy targets, right, and you're trying to actually dive in with your Ramattra, Doomfist is actually able to punch Ramattra away and deny that gap. Especially if he has his ult up, he can actually cause it to cancel, because he's gonna distance himself from the enemy targets, no longer deal damage, and the ult will go down. So I would say definitely be careful if you're playing Ramattra against Doomfist. That is not a matchup you want to go up against, just because Doomfist is honestly a very good counter. Another good counter would be maybe Roadhog, because he does have that one-shot combo, which is actually set to change because Blizzard did put out a note on their Twitter they did tweet that basically this is going to change. They're going to do a whole rework on his one-shot combo. Will he lose his one-shot combo? I don't think he's going to lose it entirely. For example, he might not lose it on a Reaper because it does have a lot of health in comparison to DPSs or a Cassidy, but you're still going to one-shot a Tracer. You're still going to one-shot some of the squishier DPSs, right? So he doesn't lose it entirely, but being able to hook up almost any target on the field and just one-shot them, in my opinion, is broken. So I'm glad that's going to change. But moving on back to Ramattra here, typically speaking, you want to play him in any comp that doesn't have a Doomfist because you're going to shine very well. Orisa is an issue now, and I'm thinking of covering her in my next video, so if you definitely want to see that, make sure you guys drop a comment down below. Orisa is a big deal because she's also able to spear Ramattra away and deny the gap. So in general, any tank that's able to push you back, CCU, is going to be bad against Ramattra because you want to stay as close as possible. You want to be the front line, you want to soak up damage, or you want to have your infinite block up when you have your ult up. And then last but not least, I wanted to cover Ramattra's ult in depth in terms of which situations are good for usage, because I think his ult is very unique. It's honestly probably one of, if not the only ult that you can kind of use when your whole team gets wiped and you might actually survive. Right, so typically speaking, what I tell a lot of people in my guides, in my videos, so if you guys do enjoy this, definitely do consider subscribing, is that I'll tell them that if your team gets wiped, very obviously don't use your ult, save it for the next fight, let the team push forward, it's fine, you'll be able to win the next fight. The thing is with Ramattra is a lot different. You actually, depending on who's alive, obviously you have to be careful, you can actually survive a 1v3 easily. 1v4 is a little bit impossible, 1v5 is definitely impossible when your team gets wiped when you use your ult, if you play it carefully. Because all you have to do is make sure that you're jumping in, having your block up, and staying as close as possible to the enemy team, which is anyways going to be close to you because they have to push that payload and they're not going to want to C9, right? So you can stall a lot harder than before with Ramattra, arguably, in my opinion, even better than a Winston with Primal Rage. So as we move forward in the Overwatch League scene that's coming up, or honestly Overwatch 2 World Cup, which is going to be insane, XQC is actually set to play in that. So honestly, the future of Overwatch 2 is looking very good. So I'm going to keep making content for it, and hopefully the channel does take off. You guys are doing great. Thank you guys so much for all the subs. And in general, Overwatch 2 is going to take off, right? So what do I see Overwatch League and pro players actually using Ramattra in is in the Overwatch League scene for sure, because players are going to want to stall, players are going to want to do as much as possible to keep the enemy targets off of the payload, and Ramattra seems like a very viable solution there. So a lot of people are going to be using Ramattra instead of a Winston. Now, can you actually dive with Ramattra as you dive with a Winston dive comp? The quick answer to that is no. Winston does have insane mobility in terms of jumping in and providing that shield, and the shield, I'm pretty sure, of a Winston is a lot better than a Ramattra, even though it doesn't have as much health as it does, because it does provide a bubble. So you're able to bubble in your Reaper as he uses his Death Blossom, you're able to bubble in the enemy Reaper as he uses Death Blossom, so there's a lot of movement there in terms of what you can do with a Winston, but honestly, you can still achieve a lot with Ramattra, so I'm really looking forward to the future. Once again, if you guys enjoyed this breakdown, you guys enjoyed this video, definitely do consider subscribing, checking out my previous videos. I'm trying to hit 3,000 subscribers very soon. The new year is upon us, and hopefully I'm looking forward to the future of making Overwatch 2 content. I'm even thinking of streaming, so honestly, a lot of good content for you guys there. Thank you guys so much. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of season 2. I'll catch you guys in the next video, and peace.